Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is David Sambek. I'm head of the Policy and Analysis Division at the APO. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we would like to talk about the importance of learning in the organization. For this interview, I have this great pleasure to invite John Hagel from the United States. John, thank you very much for joining us today. Could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. I've been in Silicon Valley in California for 40 years now. I was the founder of a couple of tech startups. I was a senior executive, for those who can remember that far back, for Atari in the video game business, and a partner with McKinsey and Company. I helped open up their Silicon Valley office and started their electronic commerce practice back in the early 90s. And for the past 13 years, I've been running a research center for Deloitte called the Center for the Edge. And just 2 months ago, I guess, I retired from Deloitte. And I'm now starting a new business called Beyond Our Edge. And on the side, I write books. I've written 7 books, and I've just finished an 8th book that hopefully will be published early in 2021.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. An organization's ability to learn and translate the learning into action rapidly, and it's the ultimate competitive advantage, according to Jack Welch, former chairman and CEO of General Electric. You also said that all our institutions will need to make a fundamental shift from a scalable efficiency to a scalable learning model. I actually heard someone say, you are supposed to work. Our organization is not a school. So if we have to learn, go register in a university. We only hire people who don't need to learn. We hire only people who are ready to work. So why is it so important to build a learning organization? This is what I really heard from somebody before.
No, it's a very common, usually not expressed quite that directly, but I think it's a very common view. And I think it reflects an attitude that was developed in a more stable world where you could go to school, learn things, and then go to work and do your work. The challenge we face is that we're in a world of accelerating change now. And so if we're not learning constantly as an organization and as people, we're going to be left farther and farther behind. So I think that's the key pressure to learn. And then I think the opportunity is there are expanding opportunities out there. If we learn faster, we could be more effective in addressing.
You actually explained before in some of the articles that you mentioned the scalable efficiency and scalable learning. So could you explain the difference between scalable efficiency and scalable learning? And why does this matter to an organization?
No, I'm going to generalize, but I think it's broadly true that all of our large institutions, and I'm not just talking about companies, I think governments, schools, NGOs, nonprofits, all large institutions around the world were built around an institutional model of scalable efficiency. That the key to success was to become more and more efficient at scale. And in a more stable world, I mean, this goes back over a century now, this was a very successful model. Huge wealth created and very large, effective institutions around the world. The challenge is that, again, in a more rapidly changing environment, we, I believe, are going to have to shift at a very fundamental level our institutional model from scalable efficiency to scalable learning, where the key to success for all institutions in the future is the ability to learn faster at scale. And that, I think, will lead to success in a rapidly changing world.
So how to define the difference between explicit knowledge and tacit knowledge?
So explicit knowledge is the knowledge that we tend to learn at school. It's knowledge that can be expressed, can be written down, can be given in talks. The interesting thing is that in a rapidly changing world, the knowledge, when we first acquire it, tends to be tacit. It emerges from experiences that we have in our environment. Whatever context we're in, we start to see new ways of doing things, but we have a hard time expressing it. It's just tacit. It's, yes, when I confront that situation, that's what I would do. But I can't even express it to myself, much less to other people. But it's very effective in terms of really responding quickly and effectively to whatever's happening in the moment.
So which one is actually more relevant to the learning organization?
Well, I think ultimately it's the tacit knowledge, because that's the earliest knowledge. I mean, once we develop that knowledge and have more and more experience with it, we can start to express it and share it with others. But in the early moments of acquiring the knowledge, it tends to be tacit. And so it's more challenging in terms of how do you access it and share it with others. And I think part of it has to do with coming together in groups where you can see each other working and addressing things in ways, again, they can't even express, but is very effective.
Bill Joy, co-founder of Sun Microsystems, said, no matter who you are, most of the smartest people work for someone else. So does this mean that we must have or must build an ecosystem that lets us to tap into talent outside a single organization?
Very much so. I have always said that if you're committed to scalable learning and just focused on helping the people within your organization learn faster, you will never scale learning to the extent of companies and institutions that systematically reach out and connect with a diverse array of expertise that can help everyone to learn faster. But the key, I think, is the mindset and approach of how you connect to the talent outside your organization. I think for most companies today, they recognize there's talent outside their company they need to access, but it's specific, it's transactions. It's okay, give me this particular product or approach, and I'll give you some money. Versus, no, how do we build relationships where we're both going to learn faster together? You have some very different expertise. I have some very different expertise. Let's challenge each other to learn faster. That's a very different mindset in terms of how to connect beyond the organization.
Isn't it just about outsourcing? Yeah. If I don't have that talent in my organization, then I can just outsource it. You're not talking about outsourcing simply, right?
Right. Again, I think that's a very static view of the world. Again, if it's outsourcing, yes, they have some expertise that I need. Great. I'll connect to it. But that expertise is becoming obsolete at an accelerating rate. So if all I'm doing is outsourcing that expertise, it's not going to be relevant very quickly. And so the question is, again, how can we build relationships where both sides are going to evolve their expertise, learn faster together so that they can stay ahead in a rapidly changing world?
And can we connect it to the open innovation also?
Yes, I think certainly open innovation is an element of this notion of connecting in ways. It's challenging the participants to come up with something new and different versus, again, you have expertise, I have expertise, we'll just combine the expertise. No, we have to evolve it so that it comes up with new ideas, new approaches, and that's really the key ultimately to continuing to advance.
Some big companies, actually, they prefer to work within their own R&D centers, or they actually prefer the so-called closed innovation. They kind of afraid to work with outsiders. So some conventional companies, they prefer a lot more closed innovation rather than the open innovation. I'm sure that there's no one way to do it, but in your opinion, because with the trend and the fast changing and everything now, still, I think open innovation is more relevant than, or more winning than closed innovation, or can we say that, or it depends on the case by case?
No, certainly it's not either or in the sense of a complete shift to one or the other approach, but I do think that it is one way I have of describing the shift from scalable efficiency to scalable learning is moving from stocks to flows. And the mindset in the scalable efficiency world is the key to success is having proprietary knowledge stocks, something that nobody else knows. You protect it aggressively to make sure nobody else can access it, and then you efficiently extract the value and deliver it to the marketplace. That's scalable efficiency. It's all about knowledge stocks and protecting those knowledge stocks. I think in the scalable learning model, it's a recognition that given the need to learn and create new knowledge, if we're just protecting the knowledge we already have, that's a depreciating asset. That's becoming obsolete at an accelerating rate. So we're going to be protecting a diminishing value asset versus, again, the mindset in the scalable learning world is how do we participate in knowledge flows with more diverse participants so, again, we can all learn faster together and keep accelerating our knowledge acquisition, knowledge growth versus just holding on to what we have. And again, you have to be thoughtful about what is it that is really going to be your competitive advantage and that you have to protect. But I think there's going to be a significant shift towards this notion of open innovation and knowledge flows.
How does performance improvement lead to learning instead of vice versa? People usually believe that learning automatically leads to better performance.
Yeah, so I think it has to do with the traditional learning model, which when you talk to executives about learning, it's about sharing existing knowledge. You go to a training program, you acquire knowledge that's already there, shared by somebody else, and then that leads to performance improvement. Great. But what we're talking about now is learning in the form of creating new knowledge. And it's creating new knowledge by confronting performance issues, opportunities, and challenges that you've never confronted before and addressing them so that you can create more value, have more impact, improve your performance. And that's what you're focused on, is improving your performance. And as a byproduct, you're learning. Because as you improve your performance, you're learning about what's required to improve that performance. And it's new knowledge. It's not something you could have gone to a training program to learn because nobody else had confronted it before.
Now what's happening because of the COVID-19, many learnings actually taking place online. Still, though, those people who actually run the schools and universities, they believe that this is a temporary situation. In the meantime, they will just offer the online courses for executives or all those training online. But in the end, they will think that we will go back to the old normal. All these online courses will be abandoned and we will go back to the offline learning and centralized. Because when I hear your explanation, it seems like learning doesn't, of course, that doesn't take place only in the schools or universities where there's some kind of training courses or training centers. It's more like a decentralized, and it can be happening any place, anytime. As you mentioned just now, that whenever we have challenges in the workplace, trying to address that, in the meantime, we learn actually something that we cannot learn from the educational institutions. How do you see the future of the so-called training for the workforces? What kind of future do you see for them in terms of the training and learning?
A fundamental shift that we're facing is that the notion that for learning, you have to go to a training room and listen to a teacher is becoming less and less central. I mean, I don't want to say it's irrelevant, but even in that case, the ability for you to access that learning from your workplace or without going to a central location is going to be more of an option. But the most powerful learning is the learning that occurs in the work environment, in the moment, as you're confronting these unexpected new situations and trying to figure out, how do I create more impact given this unexpected, unknown situation? And so it shifts the focus to say learning needs to occur in the work environment, every day, everywhere in the work environment. And that leads to a notion of, okay, how would I redesign the work environment to accelerate learning and performance improvement? If that's where the learning occurs, how can I redesign that work environment to help people learn faster? That's an issue that I think is not on the agenda of most companies, but needs to be.
So people are creatures of habit, and it's really difficult to accept that what worked in the past might no longer work today. So what's the best way to unlearn the old habits?
That's a big challenge. I think we all tend to hold on to what we know and resist changing our minds. I think part of it has to do with cultivating a curiosity, looking for things that you didn't expect and trying to understand them. It involves some humility, some sense of, yes, I know some things, but I don't know everything. And again, with the world changing rapidly, I have an opportunity to learn and challenge some of the beliefs that I had in the past. They may not be valid any longer. Be humble about it. Don't be bragging about it. And I think at the end of the day, it's again focusing on performance. For everyone in whatever environment they're in, the question is, what is the performance that matters? And if you're starting to see performance not improve as rapidly as you thought it would, or even start to diminish, that's a signal to say, maybe I need to challenge some of the things that I thought I knew. My knowledge in the past is proving to be wrong. So how do I unlearn that so that I can really drive performance? But focusing on performance, I think, helps to really open you up to, okay, is what I knew in the past still valid, or do I need to develop some new knowledge?
As you know, not everyone is motivated to learn more. And whenever they finish their work, they just want to go home. They just want to go for drinks. Some individuals are really strongly motivated to learn and for themselves. But most of the time, they just want to take a rest, and they just want to go away from the work, and they just want to enjoy themselves, which is, of course, it's not a bad thing to do. But at the same time, if somebody wants to prepare for the future, not only individual level, we're because talking about the organization level. So how can we motivate the people like that if they really think that they don't have to learn still because, oh, I have this job and I just maintain the least of my job, and my main purpose is just to stay put, don't make any troubles, just do the job as usual.
The big question, everybody today, and certainly in business, is talking about the need for lifelong learning, that we're going to have to learn all the time. And very few people actually ask the question of what's the motivation to learn? Because as you said, it requires effort, take risk, you're shifting from other things that you could be doing. Why would you do that? And I think the answer that most leaders would give, even though they don't say it as explicitly, is the motivation is fear. If you don't learn, you're going to lose your job. So start learning. And I think that's, at one level, fear can be a motivator to learn, but it's not the most effective motivator. And from my research and experience, the most powerful motivation for learning is cultivating a very specific form of passion that I call the passion of the explorer. And I think people who have this kind of passion are driven to learn. They're constantly seeking new challenges so that they can learn faster and have greater impact in whatever area they're in. But very few people in the workforce have this kind of passion. We just finished a research survey in the United States, and our best estimate is that 14%, 14% of the US workforce has this kind of passion about their work, a tiny fraction of all the workers. And I think the challenge and opportunity for leaders is to say, how can we cultivate more of this passion in the workers? And there are many different approaches, like, could be a whole presentation in itself, but I think one of the most interesting approaches for leaders is to ask powerful questions. And that's very countercultural for leaders because, again, in most scalable efficiency organizations, the mark of a strong leader is the one who has the answer to all the questions. No matter what the question, you can count on the leader to have the answer. But in a scalable learning world, the mark of a strong leader is the one who has the most powerful questions and who will really acknowledge they don't have an answer and ask for help. And I think it sends a powerful message to the workers. Number one, that there's some things that we don't know that are really important. And can we help each other get there? And so I think it helps motivate workers now to start to focus on those questions and help each other come up with better answers to the questions.
So you emphasize the importance of having capabilities rather than skills, like a curiosity, critical thinking, the willingness to take risks, imagination, creativity, and social emotional intelligence. So how will these help us cope with the future? How can we nurture these capabilities?
Yes, it's an important distinction, and obviously at the end of the day it depends on definitions. For me, when most people talk about skills, they're talking about something that's valuable in a very specific context, like how to operate this machine in this environment. That's a skill. Capabilities, the way I think about them, are valuable in every context. Curiosity, imagination, creativity, those are valuable anywhere, anytime. And the question, I often run into the challenge of, well, come on, some of us are capable of being creative and imaginative, but most of us are not and will never be, and we just want to be told what to do. My response to that is, let's go out to a playground and look at children 6 or 7 years old. Show me one child that doesn't have imagination, curiosity, creativity. We all had those capabilities as children. It wasn't just a small segment of the population. What happened was we went to school and we were taught not to ask questions, to listen to the teacher, to memorize, play back. And the metaphor I like to use for capabilities is like the human muscle. We all have muscle. Some of us exercise those muscles and the muscles come out. Some of us don't exercise them and they atrophy, but the muscles are still there. They haven't disappeared. They're waiting to be exercised. And I think it's the same with capabilities. They're waiting to be exercised, and they can emerge and become stronger and stronger in the right environments. But the question is, are we creating the environments that will draw out those capabilities and cultivate them versus, hide them?
Creating the environment where learning is so important in organizations, but not all the environments in the workplaces have that kind of atmosphere or setting. That some organizations, they don't promote the learning. There are many reasons for that. One of the reasons is because they don't want their employees to learn something substantially, then it might disturb what they are doing. It will affect their work negatively. How we can create such an environment? Do you think it should be like a top-down? Or if the culture itself, if the environment in the organization is not exactly focused on the learning, or they don't promote learning for each other either. So I'm not so sure whether leader has to lead them to learn, or there is any way that the bottom up that we can promote the learning.
I think it comes from all directions. I think workers in general are realizing they're confronting unexpected situations that were not part of the process manual that they were given and instructed to follow. And again, based on some research we did, we looked in some large companies in a variety of different departments, and we found that 60 to 70% of the time of those employees was being consumed by what I call exception handling. It's addressing situations that are viewed as exceptions. They aren't part of the process. And the workers are scrambling, trying to figure it out very inefficiently because they don't have any support. And I think the challenge, again, is how do we create environments that will support workers and help them to address those unexpected situations and learn faster and drive performance improvement. I'll just give one quick example. And by the way, again, I challenge many times the mindset is, okay, in research labs or innovation centers, that's where we need to do that kind of learning of creating new knowledge, but everybody else just does their job. No, I think it's in every department, every level of the organization. One example of creating environments to support and encourage that kind of learning, this was a software company called Intuit in financial services. They did something interesting. They implemented in every department of their organization experimentation platforms where workers could go and experiment. And it wasn't, again, just in the research labs. It was in customer service. It was in maintenance. It was in, sales. But they created an environment where the workers could go and test out new approaches in a contained area where, because again, one of the big issues with trying new things is the risk. If it fails, the company could collapse. And no, these experimentation platforms were designed to manage the risk, limit the risk, but create an environment where workers could try new approaches. And it sent a powerful message to the workers that experimentation was not just allowed, but expected. And we're creating an environment to help you do this with less risk. So I think that's the kind of thing in terms of changing the work environment that can help bring out more willingness to learn in different ways.
What are the most important learning points that we should take from the SAP Community Network?
So SAP is another software company, large enterprise software. They did an interesting initiative. This was many years ago, several decades ago at this point. They were confronting situation that they had platforms that programmers could develop applications on. And they found that a lot of the programmers from other companies who were trying to use this platform were running into questions and issues. And so they created this environment, the community network, where initially it was about, if you're a programmer and you're running into an issue in developing some code for this application, here's an environment you can go to and pose a question and see if anybody has an answer. And it turned out it was very powerful in the sense of programmers had a strong need for this kind of environment. And they created a situation where they started to watch and recognize the programmers who were providing answers. So they had reputation profiles, and if the more answers you provided, the better your reputation and the more connected you could become. So it was a very effective way of creating an environment where programmers could learn from each other. And then they started to, because of these reputation profiles, the programmers could see, well, here's somebody who has real expertise in an area that's important or interesting to me. Let me start a conversation with that person, not a question that I have, but just talk about our mutual interests. And so they created discussion forums where programmers could talk to each other and share interests. And then they found that the programmers wanted to connect with each other as they began to build relationships and start developing entirely new software. And so they created work environments, shared work environments where programmers could come in and build software together. And that was an even more powerful form of learning. Now it wasn't just answering questions, it was learning by developing new software together. So I think over time it ended up with millions of participants. So it was a very, very large and effective environment for shared learning.
A lot of people take online courses nowadays because of the COVID-19 And I'm sure that it is going to expand more and more. And then they try to improve their work performance, but aren't happy with the results. But I feel like these online courses are not fast enough. And if we focus only on learning by sharing existing knowledge, we will probably see diminishing returns. So which new types of learning models could organizations consider?
It just challenges that conventional model of learning in the form of sharing existing knowledge. What's most valuable to workers today is building new knowledge by confronting these unexpected situations, and that occurs in the work environment. And so again, I think it's a model on the one side, thinking systematically about the work environment and how can we create environments where people can learn faster in the work environment. And then secondly, cultivating a set of practices in that work environment that will help the workers to learn faster. And I think that ultimately that's where the ability to accelerate performance improvement will occur, because now workers are creating new knowledge together in the work environment that is driving higher levels of performance and impact.
Can you recommend any specific strategies for turning the organizations into the learning organizations?
Yes, I think that there are many approaches that can be helpful. I've become a strong proponent. There's an approach to strategy that some of the most successful tech companies in Silicon Valley have pursued. They never gave it a name. It was never officially a formal approach. But the name I give it is zoom out, zoom in. And I think it's interesting because it focuses on two time horizons. One time horizon is 10 to 20 years. Zoom out and ask 10 to 20 years from now, what is our industry or market going to look like? And what kind of company will we need to become to be successful in that environment? That's the zoom out. Zoom in, very different horizon, 6 to 12 months. And on that horizon, the questions are, what are the 2 or 3 initiatives, no more, that we could pursue in the next 6 to 12 months that would have the greatest impact in accelerating our movement towards that longer term opportunity and destination? And what are the metrics that we would look to assess whether we're progressing as rapidly as we thought? But I think it's a very powerful learning approach, which says the future is going to be very different from where we are today. And through short-term action, we can learn what's required to get to that opportunity, that new business that we need to become. And the companies that pursue this strategy are very much cultivating that learning mindset. They're constantly asking, what is that future business going to look like, and refining it as they learn more, and then figuring out what are the initiatives, what are the actions we can take now that would have the greatest impact, and evolving those over time so they can have more and more impact. I think that's a very effective way to focus the organization on the learning that really matters.
When the leaders are afraid to learn something new because they're not familiar with the subject, there are so many changes are happening, especially digital changes, digital transformation, so many technological things happening. So some leaders might be afraid to know more about them because they are simply not familiar with them. If the leaders are not keen on learning something new, and I'm not so sure whether he or she can lead the organization well, because she will be busy defending themselves because they cannot show they don't know the subject matter, but at the same time they have to lead the organization. I understand their frustration and I understand where it comes from, but there must be some ways that maybe we can help the leaders to learn more, or leaders can help themselves to learn more.
It's a big challenge. I mean, clearly in the scalable efficiency world, the leaders that have emerged have been leaders that showed they knew what needed to be done, and it wasn't about learning, it was about knowledge and stocks of knowledge, and just instructing, directing other people on how to do things. I think often the way we try to change leaders is to say that if you don't change, your company is going to perish. It's going to die. That's playing to fear. That's saying, if you don't change, terrible things are going to happen. In my experience, the best way to motivate leaders to drive change and to change themselves to begin with is by focusing them on a really inspiring opportunity. What amazing things could we accomplish that are far beyond anything we've done today and create wealth and impact that would have never been imaginable? And I think that can motivate leaders to say, oh, wow, that's very interesting. And again, I think it's, I go back to zoom out, zoom in, because a reaction of leaders can be, well, wait a minute, that's a fantasy. That opportunity is never going to happen. I'm just going to stick with what I know and what I do. But with the zoom out, zoom in approach, if you focus on some initiatives in the next 6 months that can deliver real impact, now you get the attention of the leaders who say, whoa, we were able to do that in 6 months? Maybe that opportunity is real. Maybe that's something that we should all be driving more focus against and learning faster to achieve. And so I think that's at least one approach to helping to motivate leaders to shift from that traditional leadership model to a learning model that is going to be much more effective in this changing world.
John, I know that you have been a consultant for a long time, and also you have been working with many business leaders. Do you have any specific cases or experiences? Share any real cases where you have seen the leaders are learning very well or successfully, that they didn't know the subject before, but then they educate themselves. That actually led their organization to be more successful. And also why some organizations fail, because the leadership or management actually didn't educate themselves well, even though there are so many changes out there. Maybe you can give us like a worst case or a success case.
On the worst case side, there are many examples that are cited that I think are appropriate, of companies that were extremely successful that failed to recognize the changing world they were in and ended up failing. I mean, the classic example is Kodak in the camera business, right? That they failed to make that transition from analog to digital technology, even though the irony is they had some of the earliest digital technology within their own company, but their leaders were so wedded to the traditional model, and it was all about the film and the chemistry of the film that was going to drive success. So I think that's, again, there are many examples in different markets and industries of companies that were leaders that have failed. And I should say that, again, it's just one indicator, but certainly in the United States, one of the leading lists of companies, successful companies, is the S&P 500. And companies that made it onto that list in the past used to be there forever. I mean, back in 1937, if you made it onto the S&P 500, you were there for 75 years. Today, if you make it onto the S&P 500 as a company, the average life of a company on the S&P 500 is 15 years. It's a huge reduction in lifetime of the most successful companies. Now, you asked about examples of successful companies that have learned and made the change, and I think there are examples of that. I'll just give two that are public examples. They can talk about them. One is a bank in the United States called State Street Bank. For a very old bank, founded in the late 1700s. Most of its history, it was a traditional retail bank, branches that gave out loans, took deposits. back in the mid-1970s, they started to experience margin pressure on their business. And one of their senior executives came up with this insight. He said, in our back office, we have transaction processing capability that's world-class. He said, why don't we rent that out to other banks who are facing similar margin pressure? And the good thing, again, that helped was they had some spare capacity in the back office. They didn't have to hire a bunch of new people. They didn't have to build new buildings. They had some capacity. They said, let's give this a try. Let's rent it out. Huge unmet need. And over a very short period of time, transformed the business from a traditional retail bank to basically an outsourced transaction processing company. A very different kind of business. And again, I think part of it was this notion of learning through action on the edge, as I call it. It wasn't trying to just change everything in the retail bank overnight. It was starting with a small part of the business that, could demonstrate some impact and then drew more and more people into it. Another example, actually, it's a Chinese company, Li and Feng. Very old company, again, over 100 years old. For most of their history, they were a deal maker. They connected apparel designers, clothing designers in the West with a factory in China to make the clothes, and they basically made a deal, got their commission, moved on. Again, back in the mid-1970s, the commissions were shrinking on the deals, and two brothers who took over the company, in effect, did a zoom out, zoom in. They didn't really know. It was just instinctive. But they looked ahead and said, what's the global apparel industry going to look like 10 to 20 years from now? And what are the big unmet needs of apparel designers? And they came up with this idea that the industry is going to be more and more complex and global, and that the clothing designers were going to need a trusted advisor, somebody they could trust who would help them connect with a growing range of resources around the world. They created a small business unit. It had 3 people in it. Their assignment was to go out to one of the apparel designers and just get to know them and become more and more helpful to them. And they learned through that initiative what was really required, and they scaled that dramatically, created more and more business units for other apparel designers. Long story short, they basically ended up moving from this deal-making mindset and business, transaction-based business, to a long-term advice business where they were orchestrating a global network of 15,000 partners to help the apparel designers. Very different business model. They learned and became quite successful at doing that.
Last time I invited a best-selling author. His name was Francis Shaw. His book is Scalable. I asked him the same question, that in some organizations, they are so afraid to educate their own employees because after they get educated and also trained, what if they leave and then join a better or bigger company? So what are your thoughts on this? I want to ask you the same question.
No, it's a great question. I think it is a big fear on the part of executives. Again, particularly if you have the traditional model of learning where you spend a lot of money on training programs, taking workers out of their work and putting them in the training programs, and then maybe sometime in the future you're going to get some performance improvement. The risk is they go through the training programs and then they leave. I think the interesting thing here is thinking about, in a more rapidly changing world, what motivates workers to stay with a company? And I think increasingly what motivates workers is going to be the opportunity to learn faster. If I'm learning faster at this company, why would I ever go to another company? They may pay more, at the moment, but if I'm not going to learn faster, I'm going to fall farther and farther behind. And so I think the companies that are going to really be successful in attracting and retaining workers in the future are going to be those who create these environments that help the workers to learn faster, together. And that it's a model that I think word of mouth will spread. I think, workers will start to tell other people they know, I'm learning a tremendous amount. I'm performing better and better. And word of mouth will spread, and other people will want to join this company because the workers are learning faster. And then they're not going to want to leave because they're learning faster there than they would anywhere else. So again, I believe the companies that really focus on this and drive that learning for all workers are going to have more and more workers not have the risk that the workers are going to leave.
In my personal experience, I used to work in Korea before. My job was to help the startups and SMEs in Korea to enter the foreign markets and get the investment from abroad. And I remember that whenever we had this program or training program or education program for, especially we try to reinforce the international capacity for the companies. So what we did is that we offer some training courses in abroad that we offer special courses for those who can speak English and who have some experiences abroad. And the companies selected their own staff and they send them to us. So after they get the training, what really happened more often than not is that all those people got trained abroad, especially, they all left those companies later and then joined the bigger companies. And because that actually background helped them to go to another job. So I've seen this for so many times. I'm not saying that we shouldn't train the employees or educate them only because we are so afraid to have to see that maybe it's going to happen. It's also true that some companies just cannot afford to retain some workers because they have improved a lot. In that case, what should we do? We just have to just let them go because we have no choice.
As I hear you talk, it's more about traditional training programs, which again are expensive and require effort. And this model of, okay, I'm going to go leave this company for another company because I can get a better job. That's a very static view. Okay, I'm going to get a better job, but how long is that job going to last if I'm not learning faster? And I think the mindset increasingly of workers is not just what am I going to be paid at the moment, what's the specific terms of this new job, but am I going to learn faster in this new work? And I think the other thing that I emphasize too is in this new model of learning, where it starts with performance improvement and learning as a byproduct, you as a company are benefiting from the performance improvement that's being achieved every day by every worker. And yes, some of them may leave, but you still have the benefit of that performance improvement. And again, if you are really focused on accelerating the learning of everybody faster than they could anywhere else, I believe at least increasingly workers are going to say, I need to stay here. Even though there may be a better job offer over there, for right now the pay is better, they're looking ahead and saying, am I going to continue to advance in the way that I need to be successful in a rapidly changing world?
How do you think more educated and capable employees improve their organizations, as you just mentioned now? How can we connect them?
In the organizations, it's a major piece of my research around this notion of scalable learning. Is one of the things that I've come to emphasize is that no matter how smart any one individual is, they're going to learn a lot faster as part of a small group that is committed to learning faster together. And so I've become a strong proponent that if you're really serious about scalable learning, one of the ways to redesign the work environment is to encourage workers to come together in small groups. And I talk about typically anywhere between 3 to 15 people at most in these small work groups. But it gives them a chance to really get to know each other extremely well, develop deep trust with each other, so that they're willing to ask for help when they need the help, and they're willing to provide help to others in the work group. But the key is that they're all committed to getting more and more impact in whatever area they're in. And so part of there's an interesting balance in these work groups. On the one side, they support each other, they provide each other with encouragement. On the other side, they're constantly challenging each other. These work groups are challenging the participants. How can we get to even better impact, more and more impact, because that's our commitment. And they recognize the challenging is not to put the other person down or diminish the other person. It's because we're all committed to more and more impact. And if we don't challenge each other, we're not going to get there. So that drives very rapid learning. And through the research that I've done, I've looked at a whole set of practices that those work groups can adopt that will help them to learn faster.
So more educated workforce can be a change agent, but that's not always the case. So what correlation do you see between individual learning and organizational innovation?
Well, I think part of it has to do with how we define innovation, because I think for many companies, innovation is coming up with a major new product that's going to change the marketplace, and it's big bang innovation, as I call it. To me, the innovation that's going to be most valuable over time is accelerating performance improvement in all our areas. And so it's really getting innovation to occur in every part of the work environment, whether, again, it's maintenance organization or factories or field work, but encouraging every worker to come up with better and better approaches to create more impact and deliver more value. And again, I should emphasize that the key element in all of this is shifting from the scalable efficiency model, where the performance is faster and cheaper. That's it. It's all about the cost side of the business. Increasingly, in a scalable learning world, the focus needs to shift to value and impact on the stakeholders. It's not just doing things faster and cheaper, it's delivering more and more value to the people who matter, the customers, the business partners, whoever is relevant. But that's the innovation that's really going to drive success. And I think that's, again, if we rethink learning about creating new knowledge and all workers doing this, innovation spreads throughout the company. Everybody's coming up with new ways to provide more and more value to the stakeholders that matter.
So which structural changes are the most important in creating a learning organization? How important is leadership? So how can the organization culture can help or hinder the continuous learning process?
Leadership is a key driver or obstacle to change. So if you don't have leadership support, that's a challenge. Although I will say, again, my general advice in terms of driving change is you don't need all of the leadership to be embracing this at the outset. You need one very senior person, ideally the CEO, but at least somebody who reports to the CEO, to be the champion for the change. And then find a part of the organization and business that is an edge, that's not significant in terms of resources or cost today, but has the potential to scale at a dramatic rate given the changes that are occurring in the market or industry. And drive the change through that edge. Show the impact that can be achieved if you move to a scalable learning model. And then over time, you will draw more and more people and resources from the existing core of the business out to this edge. But that's, again, it's this notion of having one senior person who's the champion, and then finding an edge and driving the change and transformation through the edge versus, again, trying to get everybody to change overnight to a very different model.
Actually, in the private sector, if the organization doesn't learn fast enough, and if they cannot keep up with the trend, at the end of the day, they're going to fail and then they're going to shut down, they're going to go out of business. So it's very obvious. On the other hand, in many countries, as you know, the public sector, because whether they perform well or not, because their income sources in a way is actually comes from the taxpayers' money. So as you can see, even though some people say that nowadays the boundary between the private sector and public sector can be more blurry and not as clear as before, but still public sectors are not under as much pressure as in the private sector companies. People working in the private sector might not feel that they have to learn something new fast, because whether they improve themselves or not, unless they make a huge mistake, their job is kind of secured. So they are really not motivated to learn, improve themselves. It's because for them it's kind of inconvenient. So in the case, private sector, we can emphasize the importance of learning. And if you don't learn fast enough, not only individually, but also on the organization level, you are going to fail later. And that's very obvious. But then in the public sector, what kind of approach would you take to address this kind of not learning organization trend or culture?
No, it's a very good question. Incentive structures matter a lot. I'm skeptical of the notion of the most effective way to drive change is because of threat or pressure. You know, you're going to disappear or die if you don't do this. It's much more around inspiring opportunities that can motivate people to move forward despite the risk. And so I think part of it, again, public sector and private sector, is can we find leaders who are really going to want to leave a legacy, you know, that they want to leave their institution not the same as it was before, but much better and very different from what it was before. And what's the opportunity that could motivate them and the rest of the organization to change at a fundamental level and learn much more rapidly as a result? So I think that's a key way to help drive the change. And I think on the other side too, it's from the customer side, the notion we as customers in a changing world are becoming more and more demanding. We want more value, and we want value that's tailored to our specific needs, not some kind of mass market standardized product. We want it tailored to our needs and evolve rapidly based on our needs. And the more the customers, the more the stakeholders apply pressure and say, no, we need something better, that also can be a motivator to the leaders to say, okay, we have to learn what's required to do that and change the way we've done business in the past.
If we have one organization with a full of smart people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the organization itself is smart. In order to maximize the talents in the organization, because it is actually affected by many things. If the structure is not right, then those smart people cannot contribute to the growth of the organization. So it's a leadership is also, of course, definitely play a role. Culture is also there. The structure is also there. Despite all these, if you can just give us one advice on unlocking the potential of the employees, what would that be?
Well, first of all, it's recognizing that everyone, I have a strong view that as human beings, we have unlimited potential. Everybody talks about, you know, helping people to achieve their full potential. I don't believe that's ever possible because our potential is ever expanding. The more we achieve some of our potential, the more potential there will be to achieve in the future. So it's a constantly expanding opportunity that needs to be addressed. And I think that's really a key to really driving this notion. We talk about smart people. Yeah, there are smart people. Guess what? They can be a lot smarter than they are today. They have an opportunity to get smarter. And again, it's focusing the leadership on that opportunity to say, no matter how smart the people are today and how well performing you are, One of our research reports was called From Best to Better and Better. And it's this notion that this mindset that there's a limit. Once you get to be the best in your market or industry, that's it. There's no more improvement possible. No, that's just the beginning. Keep going. And again, in a world of increasing pressure, on the one side, if we're not getting better and better, we are going to be challenged. And on the other side, it's creating more and more opportunity for us both to get better and better and to create more and more value for the stakeholders that matter. So I think that's the real motivation at the end of the day.
You have been working in McKinsey and Deloitte and all those well-known companies. And you also have written almost like 8 books, right, so far. How have you motivated yourself, and what makes you keep on forging forward?
It's been a long journey. I think from a personal experience, and actually it's the focus of this new book, the 8th book that I'm just about to publish. Part of it's my own journey and lessons along the way, but a key factor for me has been cultivating this specific form of passion that I called the passion of the explorer. And for me, the passion is about how can we create platforms that will help people to achieve more and more of their potential. That excites me. That motivates me. I'm willing to take risk. I'm willing to leave large traditional organizations to start something new and different. And it motivates me to come together with other people. Again, I think people who have this passion, the explorer, aren't just doing it alone. They're connecting with others to say, let's get together so we can have even more impact. And for me, it's been a key driver throughout my life. I've always been focused on, am I learning fast enough to really achieve that impact in terms of platforms to help people achieve more and more of their potential. And I'm going to continue doing it.
Would you like to share any final thoughts on the learning models specifically for the Asia Pacific region?
I think that it's hard to generalize. I think that there are certainly a lot of cultural differences within Asia Pacific. But there are also similarities across the world, not just Asia Pacific. I think one of the big issues, certainly in many cultures, Asian cultures as well, is this notion of reacting negatively to questions, that you're challenging them to trying to put them down. I think the real focus in that kind of environment is to understand, first of all, there is that resistance to questions, so recognize that in advance, but then focus on how can we frame the questions in the way that we're asking for help. We're asking the question because we respect the person that we're asking the question to. We respect their experience, their expertise, and we need help, and we want help. And then tying it to a very specific performance issue. If I could get help on this question, I could deliver higher performance in this particular situation or environment, but that this question is directly tied to a need and a desire to get to more performance, rather than just, I'm asking questions because I want to ask questions. No, I'm driven to give more performance, and I need help, and I respect your expertise. Can you help me? And that may help to overcome that resistance to questions.
Okay, thank you so much for your great insight. I also want to thank our viewers. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you learned a lot from John Hagel's insights today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Otherwise, you're going to miss out on a lot. Please stay safe in the pandemic, still ongoing. Let's just keep learning also so that we can improve ourselves for the future and organization.
And I should say, too, that I covered a lot of topics in the questions, very rich conversation. there are research reports on virtually every topic that we've covered, so I encourage you, if you're interested in learning more, to just search on the internet for the research reports using my name. And I'm very active on social media as well, so please feel free to connect on a variety of social media platforms. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.